"Can I borrow your shoes for my graduation?" The poor girl asked, unaware he was a CEO millionaire. The campus buzzed with excitement that morning. Students in gowns and caps rushed across the quad, laughter ringing through the spring air. Among them walked Savannah Elrose, 23, her blonde hair tied in a neat ponytail, eyes bright but always flicking downward when crossing paths with others. She carried herself with quiet humility, like someone used to blending in, even on the biggest day of her life. Today was her graduation. Not just any graduation. Savannah had been chosen to give the student commencement speech, a once-in-a-lifetime honor that had kept her up for nights, memorizing each word. Her fingers clutched the small invitation to the ceremony, like it was made of gold. In a way, it was. For Savannah, this day wasn't just a milestone. It was a victory. She had earned every credit, every grade, every opportunity, not with comfort or privilege, but with grit. She'd waited tables late into the night, lived on instant noodles and dollar store shampoo, survived off scholarships and determination. And now she was here, ready, except for her shoes. She wore the only pair she owned, scuffed flats, worn thin, with one side starting to fray. They were a gift from her mother, 5 years ago, after she'd been accepted into the university. "They don't have to be pretty," her mother had said, holding the box out with a proud smile. "They just have to get you where you're going." And they had. Until now. Savannah crossed the paved walkway toward the main hall, her heart thudding, not from nerves, but from hope. Then, she collided with someone. It happened too fast to process. One moment she was stepping off the curb, the next she was crashing into a tall man, stepping out of a sleek black car parked just outside the hall entrance. Her hand flew up instinctively, her heel twisted, and she fell, knees hitting the pavement, her invitation scattered onto the sidewalk. Her shoe split with an awful rip. She froze. Time stopped. Her right shoe was torn open along the sole, the strap hanging by a thread. It was unwearable. Panic surged in her chest, her face flushed with heat, her throat tightened. "No, not today," she whispered to herself. "Not today." Cassian Blackwood, 32, watched her in stunned silence. He had stepped out of his car, adjusting his cufflinks, when the girl seemed to come out of nowhere. She was small, frantic, dressed in a graduation robe, and now trembling on the pavement. He started to speak, but paused when he saw her eyes dart down to his shoes. They were polished, expensive, deep brown leather. She looked back up at him, her lips parted. Her hands shook slightly as she pressed them against her knees. Then came the voice. Small, barely above a whisper. "Can I borrow your shoes, just for my graduation?" Cassian blinked. He didn't mishear. She had asked, truly asked, to borrow his shoes. No one had ever asked him for something like that. Not in years of meetings, conferences, galas, deals. Not in the world of private jets and boardrooms. It was ridiculous. It was real. He remembered, in a flash, his own college graduation, when he had walked across the stage in second-hand dress shoes, with soles so thin he could feel the floor. He said nothing. Instead, he looked at her again. This girl with trembling fingers, a ruined shoe, and a voice too brave for how fragile she looked. Cassian stepped back. Slowly, he bent down. He untied his shoes, slipped them off, and stood barefoot on the cold morning sidewalk. People were beginning to stare. He didn't care. He held the shoes out to her, one in each hand. "They might be a little big," he said quietly, "but I think they'll do the job, and your speech sounds important." Her eyes widened, glossy with disbelief. She reached out with both hands, gently taking them. "Thank you. I'll bring them back. I promise," she murmured. Cassian nodded once, a faint smile playing at his lips. "Just come back with your head held high." And then, she ran. Across the courtyard, robes flowing, shoes thumping awkwardly with every step, but she ran like someone who had just gotten her dream back. Cassian watched her go, the morning chill rising through his socks. He glanced down at his bare feet, then back up at her vanishing figure. And for the first time in a very long time, Cassian Blackwood laughed, soft, bewildered, and completely, utterly undone. Savannah stepped onto the stage, the heels of the borrowed shoes clicking awkwardly against the polished wood. The size difference made her movements uneven, and the graduation gown brushed just above the floor, occasionally snagging on the oversized shoes. She tried to keep her chin up, tried to pretend that every step wasn't a fight to keep her balance, physically and emotionally. The stage lights blinded her for a moment as she reached the podium. A hush fell. Then, whispers, the kind that weren't kind. Whose shoes is she wearing? Couldn't she afford proper shoes for today? She looks like she borrowed them from her dad. A few stifled laughs echoed, cruel in their softness. The sound felt louder than it was, like it had crawled straight into her chest. Savannah stood still, holding her folded speech in both hands, her fingers trembling at the edges. Her eyes scanned the crowd, trying to find a safe place to land, someone, anyone, not laughing. She couldn't. The words on the paper swam. Her throat tightened. She took a shallow breath, then another. Nothing helped. Her heart pounded in her ears. All she could think about was her shoes. Her old ones, the ones that had torn, the ones her mother had given her, the ones she had hoped, just for today, would last a little longer. She squeezed the paper harder, willing her hands to stop shaking. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. Then, from the far back corner of the auditorium, a stillness. Cassian sat in the last row, his arms crossed loosely, socked feet tucked under the seat in front of him. Unlike the others, he wasn't laughing, he wasn't whispering, he wasn't even blinking. He just watched her. Something in his eyes, soft, unwavering, met hers across the crowded room. It didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the whispers or the sting, but it anchored her. He knew. He had been there. She could feel it. In that brief moment, Savannah remembered what she was here for. She wasn't standing in front of these people to impress them. She wasn't here because of her shoes. She was here because she had earned it. Her breath slowed. Her fingers released their grip on the paper. Slowly, she unfolded it and laid it down on the podium. Then, with both hands free, she gripped the edges of the stand and leaned slightly forward. Her voice, when it came, was small, but clear. "My name is Savannah Elrose. I stand before you today, not with the perfect image you might expect, not with polished shoes or flawless poise, but with a story that I hope is worth more than appearances." The room quieted. Even the whispers stilled. Cassian watched as she straightened her spine and lifted her chin, just slightly higher. The moment of shame had passed. Something stronger had taken its place. And in that moment, as the girl in borrowed shoes began to speak from her heart, he smiled, because he had just witnessed the hardest, bravest step she'd ever taken, and she hadn't even moved. For a second, everything blurred, the faces, the whispers, the bright stage lights pressing down on her like heat. Savannah stood at the podium, her hands clammy against the wood, breath caught halfway in her throat. The neatly folded speech she'd spent weeks rehearsing sat on the stand, unread. Her eyes dropped to it again, but her heart wasn't in the words. And then, through the blur, a small movement. From the back row of the auditorium, Cassian raised his hand slightly. Not a wave, just a calm, open gesture, as if to say, "You're okay, I see you." Their eyes met across the room. She didn't know him. She didn't even know his name. But in that moment, something passed between them that didn't need explanation. Steady, quiet support. A promise. You're not alone up there. Savannah slowly exhaled. Then, with a breath that reached the very bottom of her lungs, she let the paper slip from her fingers. It fluttered to the floor beside her oversized shoes. She didn't need it. Her voice broke the silence. Gentle, uncertain at first, but unmistakably hers. "I don't have perfect words prepared. I didn't expect my speech to start this way," she said, her voice carrying across the auditorium. A few chuckles rippled, not cruel, just surprised. "But life rarely lets us begin things the way we plan," she continued. Sometimes it tears your only pair of shoes 5 minutes before the biggest moment of your life." The audience stilled again. Savannah glanced down at the shoes, too big, too formal, and smiled faintly. "My name is Savannah Elrose," she said, "and if you're wondering about these shoes, they aren't mine. I borrowed them, because I didn't have another pair to walk in." She paused, her voice steadying as her confidence grew with every word. "I grew up with less than most. I worked nights serving fries while studying lesson plans. I walked to campus when my bus pass ran out. I stayed up late to tutor other students just to cover rent. And every single day, I wondered if I would ever make it to this stage." She looked up. Her eyes scanned the rows of students, teachers, and parents, many now leaning forward in their seats. "There were nights I fell asleep wondering what it would feel like to wear a cap and gown. There were mornings I thought about quitting, because hunger, exhaustion, and self-doubt are louder than motivation." A silence spread, thick and full. She looked down again at her shoes, one slightly tilted out, too big for her small frame. "I'm sorry if these shoes don't match the occasion," she said with a breath of nervous laughter. "But I'm proud of every step I've taken in them today, because it means I didn't give up." From the audience, there was no whispering now, no laughter, only stillness. A professor dabbed at his eyes. A girl in the front row wiped her cheek. A mother clasped her hands to her chest. Savannah's voice softened. "Some of us had to fight just to stand here. Not with perfect grades or polished resumes, but with stubbornness, sweat, and the hope that we could be more than what the world expected from us." She looked out again, this time not searching for safety, but sharing truth. "I didn't walk onto this stage in new shoes. I walked here with broken ones, but I'm leaving with something unbreakable." Her voice trembled, but not from fear. Resilience. A long pause followed. Then came the applause. It didn't crash down like thunder. It started gently, then louder and louder. And as Savannah stepped back from the podium, she glanced toward the far corner. Cassian, still seated, still barefoot, still watching her, not with pity, but pride. She smiled. Not the nervous smile from earlier, but something real, grateful, sure. She nodded once, just for him. Cassian looked down at his socked feet. Then, for the first time in what felt like years, he laughed. A real laugh, quiet, warm, disbelieving. He hadn't planned to feel anything this morning, but something in him had shifted, and it had all started with a girl in the wrong shoes who walked into his life like she belonged there all along. After the ceremony, the crowd thinned. Graduates embraced their families, camera flashes lit the steps, and laughter echoed in the early evening air. Savannah stood near the edge of the courtyard, clutching a shoebox. Her gown had been folded neatly over her arm, her feet once again in her worn split flats, mended temporarily with safety pins and tape. She scanned the passing faces, hesitant but determined. Then she saw him. Cassian was leaning casually against a lamppost just outside the hall, his jacket slung over his shoulder, still barefoot. His posture was relaxed, but his gaze was expectant, as though he'd known she'd come. Savannah walked toward him. "I brought these back," she said softly, holding the box out to him. He took it, but did not look down. "Did they do the job?" he asked. "They carried me through," she replied, a shy smile on her face. "Thank you. Again, you didn't have to." "I know," he said, "but I'm glad I did." For a moment, neither said anything. The sounds of celebration faded into the distance. It could have been awkward, but it wasn't. Cassian tilted his head, a mischievous spark in his eye. "Are you hungry?" She blinked. "A little. I was thinking, not a fancy place. Not some suit-and-tie dinner with wine lists and reservations." Her brow arched. He nodded toward the main gate of the campus. "There's a food cart. Still there, I think. They make the best grilled sandwiches I've ever had." Savannah's smile widened. "Street food?" "Gourmet," he said, mock serious. "Trust me." Minutes later, They were sitting on a low brick wall just outside the university gate, paper-wrapped sandwiches in hand, soda cans resting between them. There was no white tablecloth, no violin in the background, just street light, student chatter, and the occasional honk from passing cars. It was perfect. Cassian bit into his sandwich, then glanced at her. "You didn't ask who I was," he said. Savannah shrugged. "I figured if you wanted to tell me, you would." He was quiet for a second. Then he spoke. "I grew up not far from here," he said. "Single-bedroom apartment. Mom worked nights at a diner. She passed when I was 17. After that, I worked construction while going to school. Days on site, nights in class." Savannah turned toward him, her expression softening. "Everything I have now didn't come from luck," he continued. "It came from not stopping, even when it hurt, even when it felt pointless." She nodded, slow and thoughtful. "I understand," she said. "My mom worked at a laundromat. I used to fall asleep on the folding tables waiting for her to finish her shift. I got here because I didn't know what else to do but try." Their eyes met again, but it felt different now, calmer, like they were no longer strangers. "What's strange," Cassian added, "is that today, in 1,000 meetings, 1,000 formal dinners, I've never felt seen, until now." Savannah looked down at her soda can, then up again. "I didn't see a CEO," she said gently. "I saw a man who gave away his shoes so a girl wouldn't miss her moment." He smiled. "That's the version I like better anyway." They sat in silence for a few seconds more. The sky was turning a deep indigo. The lights of the campus blinked behind them, the world still humming with the buzz of new beginnings. Cassian reached into the shoebox and pulled out one of the shoes. "You know," he said, holding it thoughtfully, "these were custom-made in Italy." Savannah gasped in horror. "You let me wear expensive shoes?" "They were already mine," he said with a grin. "Now they have a better story." She laughed. And in that laughter, light, unguarded, real, Cassian heard something he had not heard in years. He heard home. The walk back to campus was quiet, but it wasn't the uncomfortable kind. Savannah and Cassian strolled side by side under the soft glow of street lamps, the air between them filled with the calm that follows laughter and honesty. The night had thinned out the crowds, leaving only a few lingering students and the occasional hum of distant traffic. Savannah's hands were tucked into the sleeves of her graduation robe, now slung loosely over her shoulders. Cassian, walking with one hand in his pocket, had fallen into a rhythm beside her, neither rushed nor hesitant. Just present. They stopped when they reached the bike rack near the east side of the quad. Her old second-hand bike leaned against the post, a graduation ribbon still tied around the handlebars, courtesy of a classmate earlier that day. "Well," she said, glancing at it, "back to reality." Cassian smiled, then nodded toward the small corner shop across the street, its neon shows sign still flickering. "Wait here," he said. "Just a minute." Before she could ask, he jogged off toward the store. Savannah tilted her head in confusion, watching as he disappeared through the door. She glanced at her patched-up flats, then back at the shop. He couldn't be. 5 minutes later, Cassian returned, holding a shoebox in one hand and a small folded note in the other. He didn't say anything right away, just handed both to her. She looked from the box to his face, unsure what to do. "Open it," he said, a hint of a grin tugging at one corner of his mouth. She did. Inside lay a pair of white sneakers, simple, clean, no flashy logos, no glitter, just sturdy, classic shoes. Shoes made to move forward. Her eyes immediately welled with tears. There, nestled on top of the tissue paper, was the note. "You don't need heels to stand tall. You already are. Congratulations, graduate. See." Her lips parted, but no words came out, just a breath. She started, voice trembling. "Cassian, I can't accept these." He waved her off gently. "You didn't ask for them," he said, "so don't think of it as a gift. Think of it as a start." She blinked rapidly, trying to will the tears not to fall. Her chest ached from the quiet kindness, from how effortless he made it seem, as though the gesture wasn't something huge, as though it hadn't just carved a memory she'd hold on to forever. "I've never owned new shoes before," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He met her eyes, and his smile softened. "Well, now you do. Just don't trip over them this time." That made her laugh, through the tears, through the lump in her throat, and it was the kind of laugh that cracked open something in her heart. "I'll try," she whispered. She closed the box carefully and clutched it to her chest. For a moment, they simply stood there. Two people from opposite worlds, one on a bike, one in dress shoes. But something had shifted. The space between them wasn't so wide anymore. Cassian stepped back, hands in his pockets once again. "Savannah?" "Yeah? I don't think the world sees enough people like you." Her breath hitched again, but she didn't cry this time. She smiled. "Then, I guess it's time they do." A few days had passed since graduation, but Savannah still kept the shoebox on her nightstand. Every morning she'd glance at the sneakers inside before heading to her diner shift, and every night she'd reread the note folded beneath the tissue paper. She hadn't seen Cassian again. Not in person, at least. Part of her wondered if maybe that day had been a dream, some strange, beautiful blip in her reality. Then, one afternoon, her phone rang. The number was unknown. She hesitated, then answered. "Hello? Miss Elrose." The voice on the other end was professional, polite. "This is Morgan Hughes, assistant to Mr. Cassian Blackwood. He's asked if you'd be available to meet at his office this week." Savannah's heart jumped. Sure. Yes, of course. May I ask what it's regarding?" There was a pause, then a smile she could almost hear through the phone. He'd like to discuss a potential opportunity. 2 days later, Savannah stood in the towering glass lobby of Blackwood Industries, wearing her best thrift store blazer and the white sneakers Cassian had given her. She clutched her resume in one hand, a modest list of tutoring jobs, volunteer work, and part-time experience, and tried to slow her breathing. A sleek elevator carried her to the top floor. When the doors opened, Cassian was waiting. Not behind a desk, not seated like a CEO. He stood there, hands in his pockets, like he'd been expecting her for a long time. "Savannah," he greeted warmly. "Thanks for coming." She smiled nervously. "Thank you for whatever this is." He gestured toward a small meeting room beside his office. Inside, a folder sat on the table. "I run a division here," he began, "focused on community development, especially in education. Scholarships, grants, support programs. It's the part of this company that matters most to me." Savannah nodded slowly. "I'd like you to work with us," he continued. "We need people who understand the struggle, who know what it means to fight for a degree, for a chance." She blinked. "But I don't have a background in business, or policy, or even experience in—" He held up a hand, gently interrupting her. "You don't need a perfect resume," he said. "You need a story. You already have one." Her throat tightened. She looked down at the folder, then back at him. "Why me?" Cassian didn't answer right away. His eyes lingered on hers. "Because you remind me that this place, this power, it only matters if we use it for something real." Silence stretched between them, not awkward, just meaningful. "I'll try my best," she whispered. "I know you will." Weeks passed. Savannah settled into her new role with a surprising ease. The office wasn't intimidating anymore, not with Cassian walking by her desk every morning with coffee and a quiet, morning graduate. They had lunch together sometimes alone, sometimes with others. They shared ideas, laughed about odd grant applications, debated over community outreach strategies. They also had moments, brief, lingering glances across the conference room, accidental brushes of hands when reaching for the same file, a few late nights working side by side in the same glow of desk lamps and city skyline. But neither crossed the line. Not yet. Savannah didn't know what it was exactly, just that being near him felt easy, and at the same time, impossibly fragile. as if one wrong step could shatter something neither of them was ready to name. But deep down, in the quietest corners of her heart, she hoped. And Cassian, who once believed no one could ever see the man behind the success, began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, this was what it felt like to be seen. The rumors started quietly, soft, insidious, like a crack spreading along glass. At first, Savannah brushed them off as idle office chatter, a curious glance here, an offhand comment there. But over the next few days, the murmurs gained weight, then shape, until they weren't just whispers, they were narratives. Stories invented in the silence between elevator rides and passed around in coffee breaks with knowing smirks. She must be someone special if the CEO's buying her shoes and bringing her into high-level meetings. I mean, who lands a role like that straight out of undergrad? I'd be passionate about community work too, if he was my boss. Savannah tried to pretend it didn't hurt, that she hadn't heard her name spoken in that clipped, suspicious tone. But every time she stepped into the office, she could feel it. The shift in the air, the subtle distance that widened between her and the people she once greeted easily. Then came the message, a confidential email, leaked to internal leadership and discreetly forwarded to a major corporate partner. Concerns regarding inappropriate favoritism in the community division. CEO's involvement appears compromised by personal entanglement with junior staff. That same afternoon, Cassian was summoned to a board meeting. He returned with a jaw clenched tight and eyes clouded with a disappointment too deep for words. The outcome was swift and cold. A major partner threatened to pull funding unless changes were made. Their condition? A clear separation between personal sentiment and professional action. Translation: end whatever was, or was perceived to be, happening between him and Savannah. The worst part wasn't the ultimatum. It was watching how fast a story built on kindness could be twisted into something transactional. Savannah found out later that evening. Morgan, Cassian's assistant, gently laid out the details. No pressure, no blame, but enough for her to understand exactly what staying would mean, for him, for the division, for everything they had built together in good faith. She spent that night in quiet turmoil, staring at the offer letter still pinned to her fridge, wondering how something so genuine could suddenly feel so heavy. By morning, she had made up her mind. No long email, no dramatic goodbye, just a short, handwritten note folded neatly on her cleared desk. Thank you for seeing me. I hope this doesn't make you regret it. S.E. Cassian found the note late in the afternoon. He stared at it for a long time before folding it and slipping it into his jacket pocket, then walked out of the building without a word to anyone. He found her sitting alone on the low brick bench near the bike rack by campus, the same one where they'd first shared sandwiches and stories. Her gaze was fixed on the pavement, lost in thought. When she saw him approach, she stood quickly, guilt flickering across her face. I didn't want to make a mess, she said softly. I didn't want people to think I was here for anything but the work. Cassian didn't interrupt. He waited. I thought if I stepped away quietly, it would all settle down. You wouldn't have to choose between your integrity and me. His voice, when it came, was low but steady. You think that's why I brought you in? Savannah hesitated, then shook her head slowly, but her eyes said what her lips wouldn't. You think I gave you that job because of one speech or one pair of shoes? She couldn't meet his gaze. I gave it to you, he said, stepping closer, because in a world full of polished resumes and empty suits, you were the first person I saw who meant every word she said. Her eyes brimmed, but she blinked the tears back. And yes, he continued, voice softer now, maybe I started noticing your work first, but it was the way you looked at me like I was a man, not a title, that undid me. He reached out and gently took her hand, something he hadn't done until now, not when she was falling, not when she was trembling on stage, but now, when it mattered most. Don't walk away, he said, not because I'm asking you to stay, but because you belong where people like you can make the biggest difference. She looked at him then, fully, and in that moment, there was no CEO, no intern, no story twisted by boardrooms or rumors. There was only a man who had lived behind glass walls for too long, and a woman who had unknowingly become the first to see him clearly. And for the first time, she didn't run. 1 year later, Savannah Elrose stood on a brightly lit stage, not as a student, not as an intern, but as the head of the Education Development Program at Blackwood Foundation, an initiative now funding scholarships across the country for students who came from where she once did. She wore a sleek black blazer over a simple white blouse. Her hair, still golden, still gently curled at the ends, was pulled back with quiet confidence. And on her feet was the same pair of white sneakers, the very same ones Cassian had once handed her beneath a gray sky, when everything seemed to be falling apart. Before her sat an auditorium full of students, some unsure, some eager, some exhausted from working 2 jobs just to get to class. She knew their faces, because once she had worn the same look. I used to think that success looked like heels and briefcases and shiny resumes, she said into the mic, her voice calm but resonant. But a year ago, I stood at my own graduation in a pair of borrowed men's shoes, 2 sizes too big, flapping with every step. I was terrified, and all I could think about was hiding. The crowd chuckled softly, a wave of quiet understanding washing over them. She smiled, then continued. But someone in the back row that day, someone I barely knew, gave me his shoes without asking for anything in return, just so I wouldn't miss my moment. She paused, and he never asked for them back. A hush settled in the room. Cassian, seated again in the back row as he always was when she spoke, shifted slightly in his seat. His suit today was dark blue, his tie loose, as if he'd just stepped away from work, and perhaps he had, but his eyes never left her. Savannah stepped off the stage to a gentle applause, her eyes locked on one person. Each footstep echoed through the space until she stopped right in front of him. He stood slowly, a soft smile forming on his lips. In his hand was a small, simple box. No spotlight, no applause, no bending down on one knee. Just a quiet offering. He opened the box. Inside wasn't a grand diamond, just a silver band, sleek and understated, like everything he did. "I'm not asking for a yes," Cassian said, voice steady, warm. "Not tonight. Not yet." He looked at her with that same gaze he'd given her the first time they met, barefoot, honest. "I just want to know, are you ready to walk this road with me, no matter the shoes?" Savannah didn't hesitate. She nodded, eyes glistening, heart full. He took her hand, still without fanfare, and they turned together, walking slowly toward the doors at the back of the auditorium. Outside, a light rain had begun to fall, just like that morning long ago. And as they stepped through the gates of the university, past the crowds and the whispers, there were no more questions left to ask. Only 2 people, walking forward. Not because one saved the other, but because they had saved each other. And that, perhaps, was the most beautiful road of all. Fade to black. Thank you for walking this journey with us. A story about a borrowed pair of shoes and the kind of love that asks for nothing, yet gives everything. If this story moved your heart, if it reminded you that the smallest kindness can change someone's world, then you're exactly where you're meant to be. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that hype button to support soul-stirring stories, where every tale is a reminder that healing, hope, and humanity still live in the quietest places. Until next time, keep believing in the power of simple things like shoes and second chances. See you in the next story.